Chapter 43. The Heavenly Book. Biao solemnly kowtowed 3 times, her face full of piety. Then she stood up and glanced at Zhang Xiaofan. Seeing him looking elsewhere, standing motionless, she frowned slightly but said nothing, faintly saying, "Let's go." Zhang Xiaofan had felt somewhat favorable towards this woman as they entered the tunnel, but upon seeing the 2 evil gods, he immediately remembered the difference in their sects and the teachings of his masters since childhood. His expression naturally cooled down, and he nodded slightly, saying, "Okay." Biao glanced at him, then walked deeper into the cave. Zhang Xiaofan followed behind her. This time they didn't walk far before reaching a spacious area. Unlike the previous stone chamber, this place was a cavern with stalactites hanging overhead, presenting a strange and abrupt landscape. Various colored stalactites adorned the cave in myriad hues. In front of them stood a huge stone tablet with 10 large characters carved on it. The heavens are not benevolent. They treat all living beings as mere straw dogs. Each of these 10 characters was nearly half the size of a person, with an ancient and vigorous style, appearing as if dragons and snakes were dancing, exuding a majestic aura. At first glance, Zhang Xiaofan didn't think much of it, but after staring at it for a moment, he suddenly felt dizzy, involuntarily taking a step back. Shocked, he quickly regained his composure, but the characters remained unchanged on the tablet, unmoving, yet their imposing presence was truly intimidating. As Zhang Xiaofan was still recovering from his surprise, he saw Biao walking past the stone tablet and heading deeper into the cave, following her. They didn't go far before stopping amidst a forest of peculiar stalactites. Biao suddenly halted, gasping softly, almost simultaneously. Zhang Xiaofan noticed something strange happening to the fire stick he used to support his arm. Especially the bead at the front end of the stick emitted an unusual light, particularly a soft blue glow. However, this time it was gentle, like meeting an old friend after many years, filled with longing and nostalgia. Surprised, Zhang Xiaofan looked ahead and saw what had astonished Biao. Beneath the cave floor was a smooth stone wall, with 2 tunnels on either side leading to unknown places. But beneath this wall was a stone platform, upon which sat a skeleton in a seated position, quietly resting there. The bead on the fire stick was now emitting a soft, blue light directed towards this skeleton. Biao stood in front, unaware of Zhang Xiaofan's puzzled expression and the changes in his fire stick. After the initial shock, she quickly regained her composure. After all, she was a member of the demonic sect and would not be afraid of a mere skeleton. Stepping forward, she examined it closely, but found nothing unexpected. Turning her head back to Zhang Xiaofan, she smiled and said, "Perhaps this is the infamous black-hearted ghost who shook the world 800 years ago." Zhang Xiaofan naturally didn't have a good impression of this member of the demonic sect. He snorted and said, "Let's quickly search for an exit." Biao glanced at him, pursed her lips, and said, "If you want to search, do it yourself." Zhang Xiaofan hesitated for a moment, feeling a bit embarrassed. With a snort, he turned and walked into the tunnel on the left. After walking a few steps, he shook his head in self-reproach, wondering why he was so impatient in front of this woman from the demonic sect, reacting so strongly at the slightest provocation. Perhaps she was mocking him behind his back, but regardless of his thoughts, once he took a step forward, there was no turning back. After walking a few steps, there was no movement behind him. It seemed Biao hadn't followed. Zhang Xiaofan felt somewhat disappointed for some reason, but immediately scolded himself for being weak. He gathered his spirits and cautiously proceeded deeper into the tunnel. The tunnel Zhang Xiaofan was now in was no different from the one they had entered from outside, but it was much darker and quieter. Looking into the distance, it was almost pitch black, and the road seemed longer than before. He couldn't understand how those members of the demonic sect had constructed such a vast project in the past. After walking for quite some time, Zhang Xiaofan suddenly noticed that it was gradually getting brighter ahead. He felt a sense of joy and quickened his pace, heading towards the light. At the end of the road, a soft light shone, exceptionally clear in the darkness, like gentle hands tempting people from the world. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xiaofan stepped into the light. Biao watched as Zhang Xiaofan's figure disappeared into the tunnel, feeling stunned for a moment before her expression turned solemn. Her father held a high position in the demonic sect, and she had been treated like a princess since childhood. No one dared to defy her. Yet today, in this dire situation, she encountered a relatively young man from the righteous path with quite a temper, which inevitably angered her. Thinking about it, Zhang Xiaofan had been an amiable young man at Qingyun Mountain. Why did he clash with Biao now? Besides the difference in their sects, perhaps even he couldn't explain it. Biao naturally didn't know these thoughts, but she had genuinely noticed Zhang Xiaofan's repeated difficulties with her, although she felt greatly uncomfortable. They were both in a dangerous situation, and it wasn't appropriate to confront him. She could only snort, remember it, but it was impossible for her to follow Zhang Xiaofan willingly. Without much hesitation, she turned around and walked into the tunnel on the right. After walking a few steps, Biao felt that this path was similar to the one outside, but there were fewer glowing objects on the walls, making the tunnel appear dimmer. Fortunately, the path wasn't too long, and Biao soon reached the end, stepping into another stone chamber. It was a medium-sized chamber, with shelves on one side and a pile of rubbish on the other, mostly damaged ironware like knives, swords, and spears. The most prominent item was a rusty axe lying haphazardly on top, appearing quite large and intact, despite its condition. Biao glanced around disinterestedly, then walked to the shelves. Initially excited, her expression soon turned to disappointment. Each shelf was labeled, but most of them were empty, despite the enticing names like Five Mountains Divine Halberd, Moon Observer's Rope, and Separation Dagger. Growing up in the demonic sect, Biao was well aware of these legendary treasures. However, most of the shelves were disappointingly empty, leading to her dismay. Sighing, she continued to check each shelf, only to find them all empty. But just as she was about to give up hope, she noticed a small iron box in the last compartment, lacking a label. Feeling a surge of joy, Biao carefully picked up the box, which felt surprisingly heavy. She shook it lightly, but there was no sound. After a moment of contemplation, she placed the box on the ground, took a deep breath, and focused her mind. With a wave of her hand, white light emerged in the chamber, forming a flower-like entity with a faint fragrance. Biao's expression turned solemn as she manipulated the light, causing it to envelop the iron box. Then, she cautiously reached out to open it. As her fingers touched the lid, she sensed that the box wasn't locked. Frowning with increased vigilance, she gritted her teeth and opened it.